All right, I'm now recording. Anyway, I was just going over what we're going to go over in the class, so I didn't get too deep, thank God. Thank you, Richa. And we're going to go over functions. Again, I'm not going to spend like a super amount of time on this because this is just a refresher. But we're going to go into return values and a fancy way that you can return multiple values from one function. That might save you a little bit of work in the future. You can return functions as return values. Again, it's going to be simple parameters, setting, in particular, setting default parameters, function nesting, and custom first class functions. The goal is to spend 10 minutes on this whole block. We'll see what happens. We're going to talk about variable scope, and that will also be quick, and try catch. And hopefully, if there's enough time at the end of this class, preferably a half hour, we're going to start spinning up our first React project. We're not going to do too much with said project. It's just showing you how to spin one up. And you all may notice that I don't have a package JSON in week 2. I didn't provide one because technically you don't need one. We will definitely need one when we get into React, but for just, what we're doing here, scripting, we don't need one. We can just run node index.ts in the console. And also, speaking of console, there was one thing I wanted to show you. You can run node directly in the console. So const hello equals hello console.log hello. No. There we go. So you can type in run JavaScript line by line in the console, and you can use this to test stuff out if something's not going your way exactly. And to get out of that, you want to do Control-C twice. You could do exactly the same thing in Chrome or Firefox. If you right-click, inspect, and go to console, you can type JavaScript code in here as well. So if you've got like a one-liner that you want to test, this is a good way to test it, so you don't have to run the whole project. So yeah, let's get started. So in that file that I shared, or that text that I shared, we have a list of employees, and we're going to use reduce, or rather all of these, but we're going to use this to check out our first class functions that we're going to go into. So every is similar to sum, kind of, except it actually does run through all of the objects in an array. And what every does is when you write a function that goes into every, it will return either true or false, or at least it should. And if every single one of them return true, then every returns true. So we're going to check if every employee is older than, let's say, 18 using every. So const all 18 equals employees dot every. And again, you want your variable name in here. I habitually put an X. If you see me do that, I am wrong. But you want to name it after, what the actual object describes inside of the employees array. So just employee dot age is greater than or equal to 18. So it's going to run through all of these, and it's going to do that check on every item in the list. And if they all return true, then all 18 will be true. If one of these does not equal true, because maybe somebody's like 16, then this will return false. Pretty simple. Are there any questions on week 2 index.js? False. Are there any questions on how that works? Cool, really simple, right? And then sort. So I'm just going to comment these out at the end of the class. I didn't do this last time, and I should have, but I'm going to provide everything I write at the end of the class in the Slack. So sort. So sort does what it says. And I honestly have to trial and error my way through sort a lot of the time. But sort, if I'm going off of ages again, then maybe I want an array that's sorted by age. And I can either go ascending or descending. Ascending meaning that the lowest value is first. Ascending means that the highest value is first. So const employees by age. And sort's a weird one because all of these up until now have taken in one, or at least we've given it one parameter. Sort actually takes in two parameters, and I usually name them A and B. And the sort, this is easier to explain if you're familiar with selection sort, but you're giving it the function that the core function that a selection sort would use to sort the values ultimately. So just, I guess, look up selection sort later, but employees dot sort, it takes in two parameters, A and B. And the return value is going to be a number. And that number would be, so a selection sort, when it compares two values, it gets what the difference is. If you want A to be higher than B, then it should be, I believe, a positive value. Otherwise, you want a negative. That sounds confusing, but that's what we'll do. So we're going to return the difference between the ages. If it's actually looking at 1, 0, or -1 ultimately, but the sort function will do a math dot min or max if it's positive or negative. So if it's a -20, it'll read that value as -1. 0 means that they're equal, so it won't actually do a sort against them. Or rather, it won't change their position is what I should say. So we'll just return A.age minus B.age. And this is where I have to do trial and error with sort sometimes because I always forget, which one to subtract from the other. I believe this will do an ascending, but I guess we're about to find out. Whoops. Employees.age is not a function. Oh. Console log. I am an idiot. Employees by age. Here we go. So yeah, this is an ascending one, meaning that the lowest value is first. So 19, 26, 27, 41, it's sorted by age. And if I want to reverse it, I could actually do two things. I could either do a dot reverse on the array, which will achieve the same thing, but it's going over the array again. So this is actually not the most efficient way to reverse it. Instead, if I want a reversed array, then I switch B or A and B. (41, 27, 26, 19). So does that make sense? I threw in some technical stuff that you may not already know, so hopefully that wasn't confusing, but really sort's pretty simple. You just give it the comparator function and you return the difference between the values. If you want to do the same thing with sorting alphabetically, then you have to get the numerical values of the letters, which we're not going to do now. I usually have to do something like this, like const alphabetical or alphabet, and then literally just make an array out of it. There's probably a better way to do it, and if you find it, let us know. But that's sort, so pretty simple. I'm not going to go too far into that. Now reduce. Reduce is going to get weird. So reduce, like I said, is kind of sort of like a recursive function. It's a function that calls itself and it builds a custom object as it's repeating itself. So that is mostly used for if you're making an entirely new object structure out of an array, or getting a sum of something. Like maybe I want to get the average age, which is the first example we're going to go through. It's going to add all of these numbers together and divide them by however many are in this list, 4 of them, to get the average age. So reduce is pretty good for sums. That's normally what I use it for. So I'll write a quick reduce function to do that, and then I'll explain each part of it. So const average age equals employees dot reduce. All right. So this is the reduce function. It's not complete yet, but so you might notice some differences between this and the other higher order functions. There are two input values. The first I typically name ACK. It could be whatever you want, but I call it ACK. That's the accumulator. So this is the value that will ultimately be returned and what I'm going to be using as a basis for each run this makes. Employee is, the current value of the array that it's going through. And this is important. This is the starting value of reduce. So when it first runs, this is the value that ACK is going to be. And then the next time it runs, if I were to just return ACK plus 1 and console log ACK so you can see what it does with each run. So on the first run, it's going to return ACK plus 1. So the accumulator value is going to be 1. The next time it's going to be 2. The next time it's going to be 3 and so on. So you can see that when I run it. The first run is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So does that make sense so far? I'm not hearing anything. Is there anything in the, I don't have the chat open. Hang on. All right, so no questions so far. Good.
Yeah, nothing in chat as well.
All right. So now I want to add the age to the accumulator, employee.age. So now I should get the sum of all of their ages. 133. That looks right to me. I don't know. But that's not the average age, obviously. To get the average, I have to divide this value by employees dot length. So the average age is 28.25. So does this make sense? We're going to get the next one I'm going to do. It's going to get a little more complicated. All right. So the reduce function can be used to create a custom structure out of an array like this. So, and it can be used for literally anything, including, just doing a simple map. So if I were to return, oh yeah, and the accumulator also, it can be an array, it can be a object, it could be literally any value whatsoever. So I'm just gonna show you const. This is how you would make a map out of a reduce. You would want to use the map function for this, but this just shows how powerful reduce is. So employee ages equals employees.reduce. And this is something special that you have to consider. So ACK, its starting value, which I haven't put in here yet, for this would need to be an array, an empty array. ACK employee equals, I don't need to return because it's implicit. ACK and employee.age, starting value is an empty array. So this is the exact same thing as a map function, but obviously the map is a little bit more concise. You don't have to have a starting value. You don't need an accumulator. And also what I'm doing here is I'm spreading out the accumulator. So I'm taking all the values that are in ACK and I'm telling it to basically add them to this array is what the spread operator does. You could use the spread operator on functions as well. And if you've never seen this before, then I can go more in depth after this. But this will do, and I'm not console logging it. This will do the exact same thing as map. Now, I want to make an object, and I'll show you what the object that I'm looking to make looks like. So I want to get, it's called a distribution. So I want to get the number of engineers, the number of designers, the number of product managers on my team. So maybe employee or on, in my company, I want to get the number of each job title. So I can use a reduce to do that. And what that ending value would look like is the job title would be a key. So engineer, and there are 2 of them. So I put 2 here. Designer, there's only 1 of those. And because there's a space, I have to have this in quotes, but product manager, there's 1 of those. So this is what I want the object to ultimately look like. And I can run this on a much larger data set, but this is the kind of stuff that you would want to use reduce for. So, const, I'll name this title distribution. So employees.reduce, the accumulator, the current employee we're on, and the starting value will be an empty object. And we're also going to be using spread for this as well. So this actually is going to be a little more complicated than I intended in the first place, but because the key doesn't yet exist, for the most part, the first time it runs with an engineer, a designer, or product manager, it's going to have to add that key to the object. So what I would want to do is, or actually, I don't need to do that. I can get whatever the current number is. And if there is no key, then we can assume that it's currently 0. So const num with title. And I'm actually going to show you a ternary as well. So const title equals employee.title. So I'm going to grab the title first just to break it out and make this less confusing. The current number with the title will be ack.title. And if that doesn't exist, I can just use an or and put 0. So number with title should be either whatever the current accumulator value has. So for engineer, that could be 1 or it could be 0. For designer and product manager, the first time it'll run will be nothing. So if it ends up being undefined, it actually, this is a safer way to do the same thing. But if this ends up being undefined, which it will be for the first runs, then it's going to return 0. So console log num with title, that should be 0 for each. Cannot read property of undefined. Wait a minute. Cannot read properties of undefined reading title. Ack is not undefined though. Hang on. Ack should be an empty object. It is, and this is coming up as undefined. Yeah, this should not throw.
Are you intending to use 2 question marks?
I am, yeah, this is a new way of doing that or thing.
Oh, okay.
It's quote unquote safer, but this should not be thrown. Oh, employee ages is not defined.
Okay.
Let me just make sure I'm running node 16 real quick, because that might be what my problem is. Well, now it's working.
Now it's working, yeah.
Why is it working now? That's weird. I'm going to go back in the video and see what's going on there. But
Okay.
so basically, if this ends up being under, maybe it was a question mark. Hang on. Yeah. All right. Well, this shouldn't be throwing because Ack is defined and this is returning undefined. But for whatever reason, this is throwing. So if I use the question mark, and this is something with node 16. So if you have a later version, I don't know if it was introduced in 14, whoever had 14, but if this errors out for you, then upgrading to 16 should help you. But anyway, the question mark means that if this is undefined, it's not going to throw. It'll just return undefined no matter how long I make this, chain. Whereas in the past, title would be undefined. Trying to access a key of undefined would throw. But because I have these question marks in here, making it a lot more tolerable of that. So that's something that might be useful in the future, but it shouldn't be thrown right now because Ack is defined. It just doesn't have the title key, but whatever. I don't know. And as for this or, if this ends up being a falsie, and that could even mean 0 or empty string or anything like that, this or would instead have it return the 0, which isn't necessarily what we want. Maybe I want an empty string. So instead, the question mark would only return the 0 if this ends up being undefined or null. That's why I want to use the question marks. Here, it makes no difference because we're expecting this to be undefined. But in other cases, you may want to use the double question mark instead. That is something that I am almost positive is a node 14 thing. I remember using this like a year ago, but your mileage may vary. Anyway, all I know is that
It's working.
It is working. Awesome. So now that we have that, num with title should be 0, and my console logs confirm that. And I'll just get rid of the ACK and the title. Hold on. Is num with title undefined? That's undefined. Oh, because I'm not returning anything. That's why that was happening. So I don't need this question mark as long as I return something. That's why that was happening. I am an idiot. All right. Now that we're past that, so I'll get rid of these console logs. So num with title is now 0. So I'm going to return ACK and I'm going to spread it out. And I'm going to use, so title is an indeterminate key. I can't just put title here and do num with title +1, because that key will literally be title and not the actual name of the title, which I'm not console logging this. So instead I'm getting title as a literal. So instead I want to put this in brackets. Putting the key in brackets like this will make sure that the key will end up being the value instead of the word title. So when I run this again, whoops, I'm actually going to get engineer, designer, product manager. And num with title, I'm adding 1 to num with title, whatever the previous value was. So when it gets act.title in the next runs, once I go through this first object, which has Doug as an engineer, the object should look like this. So act.title, oh, you know what? Anyway, I want to use bracket formation here because I was literally trying to get the .title key for accumulator as well there. So if I put it in brackets, it's going to use the value just like down here. So I want to get act.engineer, and that'll return whatever its value is. That's its previous. So I should put previous num of title instead to make that a little bit more concise in what it actually is. And it's going to return the same object. It's going to keep all the previous values because of the spread operator. And it's going to append engineer to 2. So when I run this again, I should see engineers, there are 2 of them. Designers, there's 1. Product managers, there's 1. So I stumbled a little bit explaining this, but does that make sense?
Can you go over the spreader again?
Yeah, so the spread, and I'll just make a, let me just comment all this stuff out real quick. So spreading, you can do it with either arrays or with objects. So const initial array, 1, 2, 3, 4. So spreading, when you're inside of a couple of brackets, just like this, it's going to take all these values and copy it into the new array you're making. So const new array, initial array. So what this is doing, it's just copying whatever the values currently are, copy, and it's pasting them here at runtime. That's what that's doing. So if I wanted to add new items to this array, I can do 5, 6, 7. So when this runs, it'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7 because I'm spreading the initial array. Oops, and I should probably console log it. Does that make sense?
So then with the object, when you were editing the engineer and like there was already an engineer, like that part didn't get copied, or?
So it did get copied. If I were to, hang on. If I were to comment this out, then engineer would end up in there. But because I'm using a previous number of title, I'm reassigning engineer to this new number. And I have to add a +1 to its previous value because it'll actually overwrite it. So let me just, and I'll keep this around. So const initial object, but yeah, great question. So my original object would be, I don't know, name, Mike, age 27. What's new object equals. All right. So same thing. I'm taking all of the current keys that are in this object and I'm spreading them out, pasting them into this new object here. There we go. So yeah, it's the exact same object. If I want to add a key to it, then I can put title, engineer. And don't forget the comma. So now I've added title engineer, but if I want to replace a value, I can just put in that same key, age equals 29, because that's what my real age is. I'm just in denial. So because that key already exists in an object, keys in an object have to be unique. So when I put age down here, it's actually going to overwrite what the previous age was. So now we see that age is now 29 because I overwrote it here. It's spread out. It actually did assign, or rather it copied these values. And then as soon as I put age in here, it's going to get rid of the original age and put in this new value. So that's what was happening up here. And that's also why I had to add 1 to its previous value, because if I didn't do that, then it would just always equal 1. Or rather, yeah, so I can get rid of that. If I were to print this out, then all titles will be 1 no matter what. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So that's object spreading. So now I want to go over, so yeah, that's all I'm going to talk about with reduce. You can do a lot more with reduce and custom objects like object manipulation, or not even objects. You can use it to add the sum of numbers. It all depends on what your starting value is and what you're returning. But most of the time reduce is used for object manipulation like this, creating brand new objects out of arrays. And you can also do, well, this is going to get complicated, but you could also manipulate objects, not just arrays, but objects themselves using reduce if you wanted to. I'm not going to get into that because I don't really see us doing that too much throughout the course. But if you want me to show you, I definitely will. So now we're going to talk about, and again, I want to breeze through this. So we're going to talk about functions. So with functions, already talked about this a little bit, but there's some more advanced stuff, including variable scope, that I want to go into. So const my function. So functions, they usually have a couple of input parameters, right? Param1, param2. And the thing with JavaScript, and this is something that something like TypeScript would solve, is that I can call this function and only give it one parameter. I can give it both parameters. I could even give it a third parameter and it's not going to yell at me. My function 1. Make sure I got nothing else going on here. And I can run it. It obviously doesn't do anything, but it didn't throw. It doesn't care if the number of parameters you give it matches the number that it expects. So if I were to console log param1 and param2, param2 will be undefined. Both of, what? Are both of them undefined? Oh, because I'm stupid. There we go. So 1 and undefined. So if I just don't supply it with that parameter, it's going to give undefined. And at the same time, if I give it a third parameter, there's actually no way to access it at all. Because I haven't named a variable to it. So that's something important to remember, that it doesn't enforce it. So you have to be kind of careful when you create a custom function. You have to keep that in mind. Now, if you want as well, you can have a couple of default parameters in there. So if the user does not, or whoever uses this function, not the user, doesn't supply a second parameter, I can still have a default here. Same thing for parameter 1. So I can do param1 equals 5 and param2 equals 6. So adding this equals will create a default. So because I am giving it a first parameter, it's not going to use the 5, it's going to use 1. I'm not giving it the second parameter, so it's going to use its default value of 6. So when I console log this, I'm going to see 1 and 6. If I get rid of that 1, I should see 5 and 6. So that's something useful. And that could allow you to, maybe you have a function that does a thing and it basically does the same thing all the time, or maybe one of your parameters is most of the time going to be a 5 or a 6 or something, but you want to be able to change it in the future for whatever reason. You can do that using default parameters. Now parameters, what else? Yeah, so parameters can be of any type, and that includes functions. In fact, functions can return other functions. And I'm trying to think of when you would use that. Well, one thing in a personal project of mine that I'm using it for is wrapping functions. So maybe a function needs its inputs to be in a certain way. Axios or SuperAgent, those are two packages that you use to make network calls, and those require a lot of inputs. So there could be like a retry value in there. There could be all sorts of stuff, but you don't want to write that out every single time you ever call, superagent.get. Maybe you're connecting with one single API, and this is something I'm definitely doing in that project, where I don't want to have to set the headers every single time. And we'll get into that, but a header such as an authorization key, maybe you need that key in order to hit that endpoint because it's secured. Well, again, I don't want to write that header every single time I ever run a .get or I need information from that API. So that's where a wrapper would come in. Some other function. So again, maybe I want to run that function in a certain way every single time, but there's certain additional things I want to add to it. And we're going to go more into this when we do start making function calls. But for now, this is all we're going to do. So I can accept a function. In fact, I could just run it. And because, I expect this to actually be something, this will throw if I run it. Some other function is not a function. So I can use default for this. So I could give it console.log. It's not going to log anything because we're not giving it any inputs, but now that doesn't fail because this is in fact a function. So I'll just do that. So it calls a function with whatever inputs you give it. And I can also return a function if I wanted to. So in order to return a function, all I have to do is return console.log. So my function, and I double invoke it. So the return value will be that function that comes up here, and then I'm invoking it with these two parentheses. Now, what if I want to return, and I'll get rid of these now. So what if I want to return a function that already has input parameters in it? I won't actually be able to do that because the moment I put parameter, or rather parentheses on this, it's going to invoke right here and now. And this might actually fail. Yeah. So that's kind of hard to show you that that's what's happening. It's actually calling this function rather than returning it. In fact, I'm actually not invoking it here right now. So this is failing because this is console log actually returns undefined. So when it attempts to run it down here, it's going to fail. So instead, I can return an anonymous function that isn't invoked yet. So once I return this, then I can invoke it and this will actually pass. Does that make sense? It's kind of hard to show you what's happening. Although I suppose I could do this. So I should see bracket function anonymous. And if I don't have this anonymous function declaration here, this will automatically invoke. Console log itself returns nothing. So I'm going to see undefined. And you can see that it ran before it returned because I'm console logging that return value. So that makes a little more sense, right? So if you want to return a function that already has input parameters in it, you got to use the anonymous function syntax here. And you can see that it is not invoking, it's not console logging hello, it's just returning this function. And if I wanted to run it, I would have to put a second set of parentheses behind it. There we go. And I see there's a question. This may have been a little bit ago, so sorry for being late. Can you go over the spread you used earlier? Oh, did you already? Yeah, so I already explained that. But yeah, does this make sense? Again, this isn't something you're going to use super often, but I use it to make wrappers for functions so I can decrease the amount that I'm typing.
I'm getting an error with the return statement there.
Can you say that one more time?
It shows an error with the return statement when I try to do it like that.
Like what I have on screen exactly?
I think so, yeah.
Do you want to share your screen real quick?
Sure.
Oh, because you've got a couple of, right after the word return, you want parentheses there.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
All right. All right, and the last thing, and destructuring. So functions can only have one return value. So functions can only have one return value, but maybe for whatever reason you want to return multiple things. The way you would do that is either an array or an object. In this case, I'm going to use an array. But maybe I don't really want it to be an array. Maybe these are two independent return values. So an example might be, maybe I want to get all of these things that I use reduce for up here, such as average age and title distribution. I only want that to return in one single function because I'm using both of those values in certain places. So I'll actually go ahead and copy this code in here and uncomment it. So for the most part, wherever I'm using the average age, I'm also using the title distribution for whatever reason. Here we go. And I want to return both of these values from the same function. So I would either use an array or an object. Object in this particular case would be better because it's not guaranteed that average age is going to be the first thing. but I'll go ahead and use an array at first here anyway. And this is something we're going to see when we use things like use state in particular is where I use this the most. And that's when we get into React hooks in particular. But React hooks for use state, the first thing it returns is a value and the second thing it returns is a function, and you want to use that throughout the app. So this is where destructuring will come in. So again, I could just have these values as the array and maybe set them independently. So const result equals my function, const average age equals result 0, and const title distro equals result 1, average age, title distro. All right, so I got both of these values coming from the same function, but that was kind of a lot to type already. I have to set two completely new variables to result. So instead of doing this, I can use destructuring on the array. So const, and it'll be an array, average age, and title distro. I'm taking this function, I'm tearing it apart right here, and I'm setting average age to the first item and title distro to the second item. So I get the same result, but I reduce 3 lines to just 2. And you'll see this in use state. Is someone saying something or am I just getting feedback? Nope. All right. And the same thing can be done with objects. In fact, for something like this, because the order might change and the order might matter for what I'm using these for, I would rather use an object here. And with objects, I'm only giving it keys right now as if it were an array, but because I'm naming these keys are the same as their variable names up here, I only have to give it average age, and I'll console log that real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. Get rid of this because that's gonna throw undefined. So I've got the name of the key is the name of the variable. If I wanted this to be different, then I would of course give it a different variable name, av age. Av age. But I'm going to leave those keys the same. Now the thing with destructuring arrays, I could put whatever variable names I want in that destructure. But with objects, it has to match the key because objects don't. It doesn't matter what order the objects are in. It just matters what the key's name is. So when I destructure this, let me just set result back to this. Again, I could do const av age equals result dot average age, or I can destructure and use the brackets, not brackets, curly braces that make up an object, average age, and title distribution. Now I can't just name these whatever I want. They have to match what the object actually is, but I can give them custom names. But first, we're just going to console log average age and title distribution. So we could see that there are 2 separate items. But if I wanted to name these different for whatever reason, then I can do this. The key would be average age and it's setting to the variable AV age instead. So when I actually run this right now, it's going to fail because average age is undefined. But if I replace it, average age is now where I'm storing that value. And I could do the same thing with title distribution as well, if I didn't want to keep this variable name, but that's destructuring. And this object destructuring primarily will be used for when you're importing stuff. Like we're probably going to be playing with Lodash a lot. And you could either import the entire Lodash library and name it Lodash, or you can import just a specific function from the library. And use destructuring to do that. And we'll get into that again when we start spinning up our new projects. And once we actually start using Lodash. So the last two things real quick I'm going to talk about are variable scope and try catch. So variable scope in JavaScript is a lot more lenient than it is in other languages. I'll go ahead and comment all this out. And I'm going to create a new function. I'll name it the same thing, but my function equals all right. So variable scoping. When I declare a variable out here, const my var equals nothing. And I try to console log it out here. And I'm actually not going to return anything. But if I try to console log my var out here, it's not going to work because the scope is only good inside of this function. Oh, I should probably run it. There we go. So my var is destroyed as soon as my function is done running. And the scope of this variable is only inside of these two brackets. But on the flip side, and I'll prove that by console logging out here. I'll actually put something in here so you can see it on my console. That might help. So yeah, we saw hello, and then I tried to console log something that's undefined, and it threw because it is now out of scope. But if I were to declare a variable out here, const sum var equals hello, I can access that inside of this function. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So-
like, sorry, so sub var, when it was like in the function, it's kind of like a private variable.
Yes, exactly. Well, private isn't quite the right word because that's more of a class thing, but you're on the right track. That's exactly what that is. It's only accessible inside of my function, and it's also only accessible in a nested function, which I'm about to do. So const my nested function, just like this. So a nested function is a function inside of a function, and it would be used as a helper function in the parent. I'm just going to call it parent instead of parent function, but that's what this is. So console log sum var, because well, I'm not running inside of anything, it's just at the top of the file. So this is actually considered global, sort of. Its scope is this file. So if I were to create another file and make some code in there, and I tried to reference some var, that wouldn't work. The scoping is off. So inside of this nested function, I can access everything that's declared inside of the parent. My var. And of course, let me run this. So it can access that, and it can also access some var because it's a subordinate scope. So everything that's in here, or this function can access everything above it, the parent function and the file as a whole, but it can't go the other way around. So if I declare something in here, const another var, same thing, is destroyed once my nested function is done running. And it cannot be accessed by my function or anywhere outside of them. So that's scope. I probably described that in a kind of confusing way, but does scope make sense in general? Take your silence as a yes. So that's scope. And finally, try catch. So a lot of the code I wrote, no, wait. There we go. Trying to get better about that. So try catch. A lot of the code I wrote today, whether it was on purpose or not, through. So you can use try catches to handle any errors where you expect something that might fail, or it's inside of a function that for whatever reason is not allowed to fail. Because a failure in JavaScript halts the program entirely. And you may not always want that to happen. For instance, I've got a personal project, it's running on a Raspberry Pi, and it's got to stay up no matter what. If it's, and my network at this house is really bad. So if it makes a function call, or rather a network call, and that fails, then the app's got to be resilient and either respond to that failure or just not let it bring it down. So I have that functionality wrapped in a try catch. So try catch. So a try catch, it's exactly the same thing as in other languages, but unlike other languages, you don't have to catch each and every type of exception that it may throw. This will catch everything. And what I'm saying is, if you're familiar with Java, if let's say you're trying to access an array element that doesn't exist in Java, it's going to throw an out of bounds exception. Your try catch has to specifically, explicitly handle out of bounds exceptions. And if there's another type of exception that you haven't accounted for comes along, then you're kind of SOL, right? So, but in JavaScript, this will catch every single kind of error, no matter what it is, which is both nice and not so nice. So console log E, and I'll have something down here to prove that it still runs after it runs into the issue. So console log, whatever. So I'm going to put in code in here that's going to intentionally fail. So I'm going to declare an object, some obj key value. All right, so this object we know for a fact has the key. So in fact, I'm going to make this a nested object because this is the most likely error that you're probably going to run into, in my opinion anyway. Sub key value. So I'm going to declare, or rather grab some object dot key dot sub key. And we know this exists. When I run this, it's going to console log value, and then it's going to console log this mess that I wrote down here. Now, if I try to access something that isn't in this object, I'm going to get cannot access key of undefined or something. So key 2, it's not going to throw on this initial run here when it tries to access key 2. It's going to actually console log undefined here. But it's not going to halt execution of the program. But if I were to put in a nested, or rather a chain, and I accessed sub key, JavaScript will throw because it's trying to access something of undefined. But because I have this try catch, it's going to only halt execution in this block when it runs into the error. It's going to run this, and it's going to continue the program as if nothing happened. So we can see that it did throw. It put it to the console and everything, but it didn't stop execution, and it still went to the console log I have below it. So the program's still running. Whereas if I didn't have this try catch, obviously it would halt execution altogether, and I would not see that second console log. You can see that down there. I don't see it. So that's what try catch is. And are there any questions about that? All right, so when we're writing our real programs, in particular for when we're working with Express, which is how we spin up like server-side code, the try catch can actually bite you sometimes, because unless you're console logging the error, so if I were to get rid of this, I wouldn't actually see anything in the log at all, right? So if I do have some code handling whatever is going on in here, but I'm not console logging the actual error, when an error occurs, first of all, you're not going to know what happens because the server's console won't have any record of it. So it could be very difficult to catch bugs. So you always want to console log your errors, especially when we're using Express. Because again, if something bad happens, then you won't know exactly what happened or even where it happened. But because I'm console logging this, it's going to show me the error, and more importantly, it's going to show me where the error happened. If I don't have this, there's not a lot I can do when I'm hunting for bugs. So it's important to console log your errors. So that's all I had for today as far as planning goes. So we're actually going to start a brand new Create React App project. So Create React App is pretty nice, and I'm going to make a new folder for this. Because I don't want index.js to get erased. Actually, I'll create a subfolder. So the Create React App script is a way to spin up a project and get started right away. And it's something that the folks over at React, at Facebook rather, made for us so that we don't have to do a bunch of configuration and working with Webpack and all that fun stuff before getting started with a project. It'll spin all that up for us, and we can get started and run the website pretty much immediately after we run this script. So I'm actually going to stay in this folder because npx should be run from a parent folder. It's going to create a brand new folder inside of week 2 that'll be named after whatever project name I give it. It'll download all of the dependencies I need. It'll create our package JSON. It'll do all that fun stuff for us. So this should be on board your machines, npx, November Papa X-ray. This comes bundled with Node, as far as I know anyway. I don't remember downloading it separately. And it's a repo for a bunch of scripts, including Create React App. So there could be like some TypeScript starter projects and some other stuff for that, but that's what npx is for. But we're going to use create-react-app. And the second argument is going to be the name of our app. So my first app. And the naming is important. It doesn't like capital letters. It doesn't like most special characters except for dash and oops. I don't want that to happen. Except for dash and underscore. So be careful when you're naming it. It'll yell at you and it'll tell you what's wrong if you give it an improper name. Now this script will take a little while to run because it's got to create the folder, it's got to create all the files, and what takes the longest is downloading all of the dependencies. So those dependencies, which will be hidden from you, actually are React itself, Webpack, all of the little plugins that Webpack needs, ESLint, I think, all sorts of stuff. So this is going to take a minute to run. Depending on your network connection. As we go through the course, because this script takes as long as it does to run, we're just gonna do most of our work in the same project, at least the learning stuff. So I'll give this a few minutes. So yeah, you can see all that stuff that it just listed there. Oh yeah, 171 packages that it downloaded. No, it added 1,300 packages. And one of the things that's both good and bad about the Node ecosystem is that every package that you add will have sub-dependencies, and those dependencies will have their own dependencies and so on. So our Node modules folder, where it dumps all of those, it's going to be a gigantic folder. This will take up a lot of space on your machine. But one of the things that it downloads in particular that I'm trying to scroll through is Webpack. So Webpack, when we actually build our projects and spit out just the raw HTML and JavaScript files that will eventually get deployed, Webpack will tree shake. It'll transpile all of that code into something that our browsers can actually run, because our browsers cannot natively run the React code that we're going to write. But it'll transpile all of that into a bundle, is what it's called. And it'll tree shake. So it's only going to bring in the stuff that's actually referenced in your code. So if you've got like a bunch of dependencies that you're just not using, it's not going to increase your bundle size with a bunch of useless code. So that's what Webpack is. And it's a pain to configure. So I'm glad Create React App exists because we don't have to do any of that stuff, which is nice. And in our package JSON, so we've got, these are our dependencies, and there's really not a lot of them because it's using React scripts, which is what we just ran. And inside of React scripts, that's where we're going to see, like I said, Webpack, ESLint, a bunch of stuff in here. Web Vitals, we're not using it. React, this is, React and React DOM are the two things that we need for a React project, obviously. And when we start writing React code, these are the dependencies that we will be using. And testing library, we're probably not going to touch this very much, but React testing library is a way to write automated test code for your project. So React testing library would spin up a headless browser, meaning it's a browser that doesn't actually show anything. There's no window. It just runs it in the background. And React Testing Library allows you to make sure that certain values are showing up the way that they're supposed to. It's a way to test user experience. And we'll get into automated testing probably as a bonus lesson a little later on. We may not go through React Testing Library too much, but that's what that is. And then scripts. So we have start, which we're going to run in a couple seconds. That will create a server that will dish out the React app, which is pretty nice because if you've ever played with something like PHP, you have to take your PHP code, put it in a specific folder on your machine, make sure that Apache, whatever it was called, is running. Whereas with Start, you don't have to have anything on your machine configured. Webpack will take care of that for you. So that's nice. Build, that's what I was talking about earlier. Build will take all of your code, transpile it into something that your browsers can actually run, and create a bundle folder that'll have all that stuff. And that's what you'll put into probably Nginx or something. Test, that's using React Testing Library. And eject, don't run this on a project you care about, but eject will take all of the dependencies in React scripts and put all the files at the top level here. So if you need to do something custom with something like Webpack or ESLint or whatever it is, then you would want to run eject and then do whatever config you're going to do. But it's not something that you can reverse if you decided it was a bad idea. So if you want to see what eject does, I would actually create a brand new React project, or in fact, I'll just do it on this machine at the end of this lesson. And you can see all the stuff that is actually in this project, because there's not a lot of files here as far as React app is concerned. So now we're going to run it. Did I name it? Not my first app. To run any script, npm run, and then the name of the script. So the name of the script is going to be start, build, test, eject, etc. And I'm actually going to run a build first so you can see what that looks like. So npm run build. It's going to create a brand new folder. I think it's going to be called dist for distributable in your my first app folder. And that's what the bundle will be. So I can't really run it directly in the browser, but and the optimized part, it's doing tree shaking. So any dependencies that we're not using, it's ignoring them. And another thing that Webpack allows us to do, so browsers are slower to adopt new JavaScript features than we'd like to see. So there's another dependency called Babel. Babel will take all of your, it's called ES6 or ES7 code, like all the fancy stuff you're doing, like those two question marks I showed you, and the question mark after the keys when I'm trying to access chained objects. That stuff is going to be brand new JavaScript features that certain browsers, Internet Explorer, have yet to actually adopt. So Babel will take all of your brand new shiny code and convert it into an older version of JavaScript so that each browser can actually run it. And Chrome and Firefox aren't super slow to adopt things, but it did take them like 5 years to adopt all of the new ES6 features. In fact, I think they're still doing it. So Babel is something useful. So we've got our bundles that were created, creates main.js. Don't worry about this in the middle here. This is just, I believe it's a hash. I'm not really sure. The CSS, and it just takes our, inside of our source, we have, where is it? Oh, it's in public. It takes our index HTML, favicon, all this fun stuff, and throws that in there as well. So this is the bundle. So this looks like just regular, in fact, it is regular old website code. And the main.js is incomprehensible. But this is valid JavaScript, believe it or not. But this is all of our React code that was transpiled. And this is also a security thing. So you may not necessarily want people knowing how something was written. So this will definitely help. Good luck reading this as a hacker. So that's our build. And I'll just get rid of that folder. And now I'm actually going to run this project. So our base project is just the React logo spinning. But when I do start, we can see that it's spinning up our server to actually dish out our React websites. it's going to host it on a specific port. I think it's default to 3000. So we would want to go to localhost 3000, and I didn't even do anything. It's just opening the browser up for me. And yeah, it is localhost 3000. Now, if you've got another app, and you probably don't, but if you've got another app on your computer that's running on port 3000, then this is going to complain because you can't have more than one program listening to one port on any computer. So this is something that you would actually need to do an eject for. Maybe you're working on two different websites and for whatever reason, you got both of them running. One of them is going to have to be on a different port. But I'm imagining that none of us are going to run into that problem. But yeah, this is our base project. Now let's dive into the code a little bit. So the entry file, well, technically the entry file is index.html. And right now we don't have any, no problem. This will be recorded, Bella. And I'll put it on YouTube as well as last week's and link it in our Slack. But the entry point is going to be our index.html. And right now this doesn't reference our script, but Webpack will take care of that for us. But we do have a div here. This is our root div, and it's named root or ID as root. So this is important. If you don't have this in here, then our JavaScript code won't know what to edit. And that's important because index.js, this is our entry file for the JS portion of our app. And we can see that it renders React DOM is the package you need for this, and it's already here for us. React DOM.render, you give it a React component, which in this case is the app component, which is up here. And it will replace the documents element by ID root with whatever app code has. So in our index.html, it's empty. It's just a div. In fact, I don't think it replaces it. I'm wrong. It'll put it inside of the div. So if I were to name this something else, then it would break our website. So that's what that is. So app is imported from .app. So I can commit, or on a Mac, it's command click. On a Windows, I think it's control click on a file name, and it'll open up a new tab with that file. So we have our app function, and these functions return React components. React components are denoted by two parentheses and what looks like a bunch of HTML code. And for the most part it is, but there's some differences that we're going to go into, such as if you're familiar with HTML, class name is usually just class, but for whatever reason, the people who make React decided it should be named class name. I'm not 100% sure why, but that's one of the small differences. Another difference is that we can bring in custom third-party components, and we'll be doing that probably next lesson with Material UI. There's also Bootstrap. I imagine you're actually more familiar with Bootstrap, so that's probably what we're going to do, but Bootstrap React. This is a quick way to make our apps really pretty. And this is what we're going to start with next week, but we have custom buttons. So primary, secondary, danger, etc. We have cards that we could use, and the JSX code is posted in here for us. So we can copy this and, mess around with it as we need to, but we can see that these are capital letters. So lowercase letters are going to be your vanilla HTML stuff. So we got div, we got header, paragraph, etc. But if we're using custom components, they are going to be capital letters. Once we make our own custom components, we should also be naming them with capital letters. That's just a convention. It's not required, but it's good practice to do that. So we're actually going to clean out a lot of this stuff because we won't need it. We don't need the logo, SVG. We don't need report web vitals. I'm not 100% sure what this even does, to be honest, but we don't need it. I'm not going to use it. App CSS we might keep. And one thing that they stopped doing for some reason, but you definitely should do, is use the JSX file extension. Because in a React app, you could have files that are just, functions like making network calls or formatting text on your screen. Maybe you've got a number, you want to make it look more like currency. So adding a $sign, you could have a function for that. So having that file extension as JSX instead of just JS will tell you, and my icon actually changed as well. It'll tell you that this is a component that will return something that shows on the screen. Whereas .js, that implies that it doesn't. There's no functional difference between these JSX and just JS. It'll do exactly the same thing, but it's good practice nonetheless. So if you're making a component, make sure your file extension is .jsx. And that won't break any of the references, because for the most part, we don't use, or you can, but you shouldn't use file extensions in your imports, except for this. If they're JavaScript files, if they're any other kind of file like a CSS or a JSON or an SVG, like we have in app.js, .svg, then you want to have the file extension. But if it's just JavaScript, then you don't need it. It'll default to Java, to look for a JavaScript file named that. Trying to think of what I can go into right now where it'll fill up 10 minutes. Does anybody have any questions in general of what's going on here? I'm gonna go with no. So let's just go ahead and clean out the files that we're not going to use. So for starters, we don't need this logo floating around. So I'm actually just going to get rid of everything in here and return just the word hello world. Hello world. There we go. Hello world. So we can see that up here, logo is underlined with green, meaning that it's declared, but it's never red. We can get rid of that because we're not going to use the logo. So we can go ahead and delete logo.svg. And when I'm making changes like this, I like to make sure that everything is still working like it's supposed to. So I'm seeing hello world here. So good so far. App.test.js. We don't really need this right now, but this is a good opportunity to tell you about React testing library real quick. So it'll render your component on the back end without actually showing it on screen. And you can do tests like screen.get by text learn React. This verifies that this element is showing on the page. Right now, this is going to fail, obviously, because I just removed everything in app.js except for the words hello world. So I can go ahead and run this now. npm run test. And that's one of the scripts that's in the package JSON. So this is going to fail eventually. There we go. So not only will it tell you that it failed, it's going to tell you what line it failed on, and it'll actually print out the nodes that it's looking at when it's running the test. So we can see that, learn React, it's not in there. So the test is failing. If I were to change this to hello world, and I'm pretty sure this is case sensitive, I'm actually not sure about that. It's actually in watch mode right now. So the moment I changed that file, it ran the test again. So we should see that it passes this time. This is very, React DOM is no longer, what? That may have been a side effect of watch because it ran the first time. I don't know what's wrong now. Okay, whatever. Like I said, we're not going to be messing with tests too much. In a perfect world, that was supposed to pass, but I guess there's a problem with React DOM for some reason. So that might just be something that they didn't update in the script. But anyway, we're going to get rid of it. We don't need it. And we're going to get rid of report web vitals because, like I said, not going to use it. Get rid of the import. And we can get rid of this file. Setup tests, same thing. We're not using it. So we're just going to get rid of it. And at the same time, we can go ahead and get rid of this test script in our package JSON. And I would also get rid of eject because you don't want to run that by accident, but I'll just leave it in there. Index.css, so we're probably going to keep that for now. Yeah, so this is our cleaned out version. We're going to keep everything in public because I believe it uses everything. Package lock JSON. Now, package JSON lists the dependencies that we need, and our package lock makes sure that we're using the exact same versions of those packages. So this isn't something that we edit. This is something that that NPM maintains for us. But if we have something like this caret, that means we want at least 18, but we'll settle for 18.1.3, something like that. This tells it how to pick the exact version that we're going to use. If I didn't have that caret there, then it would get 18.0.0. It would not get 0.0.1 or anything other than this. So this is strict, and this is allowing it to go up a version or two. And you generally want to use a caret because most minor version changes, like 0.5 and point whatever, those are going to be bug fixes and vulnerability fixes. So because we're using third-party code, we're kind of dependent on them maintaining their stuff. And occasionally there could be a vulnerability reported that makes your site a little bit more hackable. So you want to allow it to automatically patch those, so we're not worrying as much about that. So generally you want that caret is what I'm saying. We don't need the README. We can get rid of that too. The git ignore. So we're gonna play with GitHub and git ignore. I'll go more in depth with this, but git ignore basically is a list of files and folders to not push to our Git repository. And when I say Git repository, I'm talking about hosting our code on GitHub. So if you don't have a GitHub account, go ahead and make one before next week. I don't know that we're going to use it for a little while, but I'll look at this one. So this is all of the code that I have in this repo. And what this allows me to do is work on this project across multiple computers or across teams. So I've got a project at work that I won't open because it's under an NDA, but it's called The Client and it's in a GitHub repository. So we've got a whole team of people and teams of teams actually working on this one project. So it's got to be hosted somewhere, GitHub. And we'll go more into how to use GitHub, how to make pull requests, how to make branches, all that fun stuff. But the git ignore tells it what files to not push up to the server. So coverage, that's kind of useless to share across teams. Build, also something that I shouldn't push up to GitHub. There could be miscellaneous stuff like the DS store, which is a Mac thing. I don't want those in the repository, the debug logs, all that fun stuff. And there might be secrets that we're working with. So that's what environment is. Environment allows you to specify secrets. So if you're hitting a non-prod version of an API, then you might have the authorization stuff in the env. And you don't want that file pushed up into production because that's how websites get hacked. But yeah, that's what that is. Let's see what else. I already talked about the node modules folder, but whenever you bring in third-party code, that's where that code's going to live. And that's also in the git ignore because you don't want to push all this code up into your repository because it's a lot. When you're sharing these projects across either different computers or different people, they have the package JSON that will allow them to pull down all of these dependencies on their own machines. You don't want to take up too much space in GitHub. Not that they care, it's owned by Microsoft, they can afford it, but it would be a massive pull if you were to put all your node modules in there. But yeah, I think that's where I'm going to stop. Next week, we're going to talk more about JSX and its format and start playing around with code and make stuff happen on the screen. It's going to be great. And we're also going to talk about React Bootstrap and how to use custom components in your React code. Are there any questions? I blew by the JavaScript refresher. on purpose because we should already know it, but just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I'm gonna post the code, the example code that we worked with. Maybe clean it up a little bit, but I'm gonna post this in our Slack channel, and there will also be a recording of this lesson in the Slack channel as well. I'm gonna try and get that done before the weekend. But yeah, last call, questions, anything? Everything I said makes sense. Your silence says yes, and we'll see you all next week.